Disclaimer. Horror Hill is a horror anthology podcast bringing you scary stories from all corners of the internet and beyond. As such, certain stories include content that some listeners might find offensive. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Horror Hill. I'm your host, Eric Peabody. Tonight, I've got a story for you from Red Bad Andy, and it's called The 13th Floor. Sylvia Brooks is like many of us. After a long day of work, she comes back to her apartment and tries to relax before she has to go back the next day. Since Sylvia walks to and from her job, it's convenient that her apartment building has an elevator up to her unit on the 16th floor. But after a particularly long shift, Sylvia sees something odd in the elevator and is now haunted by visions of a tall, spectral figure coated in white dust, and it seems that others in the building are seeing it as well. What is this menacing presence, and why is there suddenly a 13th floor in the building that comes and goes? Find out tonight on Horror Hill. You're listening to the free edition of this program. If you'd like to help support Horror Hill and also remove these pesky ads, head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. You'll get instant access to hundreds of ad-free stories, so what are you waiting for? Also, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, do us a favor and drop a like and subscribe. Become part of our dark circle, listeners. And now, from author Red Bad Andy, I give you The 13th Floor. Sylvia Brooks was tired after a long day of work. She was a nurse at the Westview Hospital. Normal days were rough, but she had just worked a double shift and was even more exhausted than usual. Her shift had finally ended, and she was out the door. The cool night air clung to her like a damp shroud, and the streetlights flickered faintly as she walked home. She appreciated not having to worry about parking in such a normally busy city. Living so close to work had its advantages. Westview was often still bustling at this hour, but tonight it felt abandoned, as though the world had retreated into the shadows. Her apartment building loomed ahead, its silhouette cutting sharply against the faint moonlight. She quickened her pace, anxious to get inside. She walked into the lobby of the Central Heights apartment building, passing by Ray, the doorman, and politely acknowledging his wave to her. She would normally stop and say hi, but she was very tired from the day and was anxious to get home for a bubble bath, a stiff drink, and maybe a TV show before she passed out. She walked toward the elevator and was already scrolling her phone for something light to watch while waiting for the long ride to the 16th floor. She pressed the button, and while she awaited the arrival of the elevator, she suddenly felt a weird sensation. The hair on her arms stood on end, and she felt like she was being watched. Looking over her shoulder, she saw nothing. No one was waiting in the lobby. Ray was at his station reading a novel. It must have been nothing. Still, the feeling persisted, like fingers tracing her spine. The elevator arrived, and she stepped on. She quickly pressed the number 16 and was scrolling TikTok for a few funny shorts to pass the time. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught something strange. A powdery, white dust was on the floor near the elevator console. She checked herself to make sure she was not covered in something, but found no white dust on her person. Then she looked closer and saw a strange, chalk-like smudge on the console between the numbers 12 and 14. It was disturbingly cold when her hand hovered near the strange smudge. She stood a while processing the odd sight before the bell rang and the doors opened to her floor. She shrugged and stepped off. She walked down the hall to her apartment and sighed in relief that her day was over. But as Sylvia approached her apartment door, eager to collapse onto the couch, she dug into her bag, her fingers brushing past her phone, wallet, and a crumpled granola bar wrapper. And her keys weren't where they should be. She paused, her heart rate quickening as she patted down her pockets again, the fabric cold against her palms. A knot formed in her stomach as she realized the truth. Her keys were still at the hospital, left on the break room counter. She leaned against the door, the chill of the hallway seeping through her thin scrubs. She groaned and trudged back toward the elevator, resigned to having to go back to work and get her keys. She reached the elevator and pressed the down button. After a moment, the door opened. It had not gone very far. But to her surprise, it was not empty. In the elevator was an incredibly large figure in a long white coat. Their face was hidden by a hood, but they were impossibly tall and rail-thin. Sylvia took an instinctive step back at the odd sight, but she tried to compose herself and not stare. She considered waiting for the next elevator, but for some reason, the door did not close. The figure did not leave. They simply waited for her, staring impassively underneath their deeply shrouded hood. Knowing she had no way to get back into her apartment unless she went to get her keys, Sylvia stepped onto the elevator with the tall figure and went to press the button for the lobby. She noticed something that made her double take, even with the giant white-coated figure in the elevator, silently standing next to her. There was an extra button on the panel. It was a glowing 13, clearly having been pressed by the stranger, who was the only person who could have selected it. It did not make sense, though. Why was there a button for a floor that didn't exist all of a sudden? It was not there earlier when she had gone up to her floor. She saw that the 13 bore a large imprint of white chalky powder, and then looked over and saw that the figure's feet were also surrounded by the odd substance. The elevator lurched into motion, and Sylvia felt a cold dread as it began to descend, the buttons on the panel flickering in a strange, otherworldly rhythm. The figure beside her remained motionless, its presence filling the confined space with an oppressive silence. She sensed its gaze upon her, though its face remained hidden beneath the hood. Her breath caught as the elevator slowed, and the digital display above the doors flashed from 14 to a distorted blur, and then to a number that sent a chill through her veins. 13. When the doors slid open with a hollow clang, a dimly lit hallway unfolded before her, a place that didn't belong in her building. A thick, damp air spilled out, carrying the scent of old dust mixed with a trace of something metallic. Sylvia's heart pounded in her chest as the figure stepped forward with impossibly fluid movements. Pausing in the doorway, it slowly turned its hooded head in her direction, almost as if inviting her to follow. She stood rooted to the spot, unable to move. Her legs refused to budge as her mind shouted for her to run, to scream, to do anything other than step further into that dark, unnatural space. She felt lightheaded all of a sudden, and she tried to hold herself up against the wall of the elevator, but crumbled to the floor, unconscious, a moment later. Sylvia sat up and almost screamed when she realized she was still in the elevator. It was back down to the lobby, and there was no strange figure in a white hood. She had no idea how she could have passed out. Maybe she was more exhausted than she thought. But it had felt so real, like it had really happened. She had never had such a vivid dream like that before, or more like a nightmare. She stepped out, casting one last glance at the elevator panel, and thought she saw a faint smudge of white powder near the panel. She left and started heading back to her work to get her keys. She was shaken by the experience and returned to work and collected her keys without incident. On the walk back, it had gotten very cold outside, and she shivered as she moved. Yet her thoughts continued to linger on the strange figure and the bizarre nightmare of the 13th floor. When she got back to her building, Ray commented on how she looked a bit stressed out, and she told him it was nothing, just bad nerves after a long day of work. He nodded, and she pressed on. Yet, when she arrived at the elevator, she got that weird feeling again. Despite how late it was now and how tired she felt, Sylvia decided to take the stairs. She was sweating and exhausted from the climb up the stairs, but had finally gotten back home. She decided to skip the bath, just take a shower, and go to bed. The next morning, on her way to work, she was disturbed when she saw paramedics outside the building. She walked up to Ray to ask what had happened. Ray's face was drawn, his usual smile absent. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "It's Mrs. Donovan from 1406, he said, shaking his head slowly. "Found her this morning when she didn't answer her door. Her daughter called, worried when she couldn't reach her." Sylvia felt a chill run through her body. "What happened to her?" "Nobody knows for sure," Ray said, glancing toward the paramedics. "Police are saying it looks strange. No obvious signs of what killed her, but..." He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "They said she was covered in some kind of white powder, like chalk or something. Never seen anything like it in my 30 years working here." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sylvia's feet. White powder, like in the elevator, like in her nightmare. "Did you know her?" Ray asked, noticing her pallor. "Not really," Sylvia managed, her mouth suddenly dry. "Just passed her in the halls sometimes." She tried to recall Mrs. Donovan's face, but could only conjure a vague image of an elderly woman with silver hair who always nodded politely when they crossed paths. "They're saying it might have been a sudden cardiac arrest, but who knows?" Ray continued. "Poor woman lived alone all these years after her husband passed. At least it was quick, whatever it was." Sylvia nodded mechanically, her eyes fixated on the elevator doors. She thanked Ray for the information, telling him she had to get to work. Yet, deep down, she felt torn. Part of her wanted to dismiss the unsettling news about the tenant who had died and been discovered with a strange substance, eerily similar to what she had seen on the creepy white figure she wished was only a nightmare. But despite her desire to move on, the thoughts clung to her, refusing to let her find peace. Her workday went by in a haze, and she felt detached from everything as she struggled to process the bizarre night before. She hurried home with an anxious dread gnawing at the back of her mind. As she arrived back at her apartment building, she mustered her courage to approach the elevator. The metallic doors slid open with a soft ding, and she hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. Her eyes darted around the small, dimly lit space, half expecting shadows to flicker in the corners. With a steadying breath, she reached out and pressed the button for her floor. Her gaze lingered on the buttons, scanning for anything unusual. The area between the numbers 12 and 14 was clean and unmarked, devoid of any peculiar chalky residue. The elevator hummed quietly as it ascended, leaving nothing but the sterile scent of metal and the gentle whir of machinery. She breathed a sigh of relief at the normal ascent and walked down the hall to her apartment. Just as Sylvia inserted her key into the lock, she heard footsteps approaching from down the hall. "Sylvia? Hey, I thought that was you." She turned to see Chelsea Matthews, her neighbor from 1604, walking toward her with a reusable grocery bag hanging from one arm. Chelsea's dark curls were pulled back in a messy bun, her face drawn with worry despite her attempt at a smile. "Hi, Chelsea," Sylvia replied, forcing a polite smile. They weren't close friends, but they often chatted in passing since moving in around the same time last year. Chelsea glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. "Did you hear about Mrs. Donovan?" she whispered, her voice tight. Sylvia nodded, the key still in her door. "Ray told me this morning. It's awful." "I can't stop thinking about it," Chelsea said, hugging her grocery bag closer to her chest. "I saw her just 2 days ago in the laundry room. She seemed perfectly fine, talking about her granddaughter's ballet recital." A chill crept up Sylvia's spine. "Did Ray tell you about the white powder they found?" Chelsea's eyes widened. "Yes, that's what's so strange. My sister works at the police station as a clerk. She couldn't tell me much, but she said the investigators were baffled. It wasn't any kind of drug or poison they recognized, just this weird chalky substance all over her apartment." Chelsea's voice dropped even lower. The medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death yet. Sylvia felt her legs weaken slightly, and she leaned against her doorframe. That's disturbing. There's something else, Chelsea said, stepping even closer. Mrs. Donovan told me something weird the last time I saw her. She mentioned having nightmares about a tall figure in white visiting her at night. She shook her head. I thought it was just an old woman's imagination, but now... The key slipped from Sylvia's fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. Chelsea jumped at the sudden noise. Sorry, Sylvia mumbled, bending to retrieve it with trembling hands. Did she say anything else about this figure? Chelsea's brow furrowed. Just that it was impossibly tall and wore some kind of hood. She said it left marks on her floor, like footprints or something. She shrugged. I figured it was just her medication giving her vivid dreams. Sylvia's mouth went dry. And you said this was 2 days ago? Yeah, Chelsea nodded. The day before she died. She studied Sylvia's face. Are you okay? You look a bit pale. I'm fine, Sylvia lied, forcing herself to stand straighter. Just tired from work. These double shifts are killing me. She fumbled with her key again. I should just get some rest. All right then, take care and stay safe. I'll see you around, and don't work yourself too hard. Have a good rest of the night. Chelsea waved goodbye and went back to her own apartment. Sylvia stepped inside her own and let out the breath she had been holding while hearing all of the disturbing things Chelsea had said about Mrs. Donovan and her untimely death. Sylvia locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart hammering in her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts, but all she could see was the hooded figure from the elevator, its impossibly tall frame, and the white powder trailing behind it. She pushed herself away from the door and moved through her darkened apartment, flipping on lights as she went. The shadows seemed longer tonight, the corners of her home darker and more ominous. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands, spilling a few drops on the counter. She didn't bother to wipe them up. The television droned in the background as she curled up on her couch, wrapping herself in a throw blanket despite the warmth of the apartment. The news played footage of paramedics outside her building, a reporter's voice discussing the mysterious death of an elderly resident. Sylvia quickly changed the channel. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hooded figure and the impossible 13th floor. Her mind kept replaying Chelsea's words about Mrs. Donovan's nightmares. The same nightmares she'd had. The same figure she'd seen. Around midnight, Sylvia finally dragged herself to bed. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional creaks and groans of the building settling. Her eyelids grew heavy despite her anxiety, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. She woke with a start, her alarm blaring beside her. For a moment, Sylvia felt disoriented, uncertain if she'd actually slept or merely closed her eyes for a few minutes. Her body felt heavy, her mind foggy, as she dragged herself out of bed and into the shower. The hot water did little to wash away her unease. As she dressed for work, Sylvia found herself glancing repeatedly at her door, half expecting to hear a knock or see the handle turn. She chided herself for being ridiculous, but couldn't shake the dread that had settled deep in her bones. Her morning routine took longer than usual. Every sound made her jump, the coffee maker gurgling, a neighbor's door closing, the elevator humming in the distance. By the time she was ready to leave, she was already running late. Sylvia hesitated at her door, taking a deep breath before stepping into the hallway. The corridor was quiet, the morning light filtering through the windows at each end. She locked her door and turned toward the elevator, only to freeze mid-step. Chelsea stood in the middle of the hallway, facing the wall. She wore her hospital scrubs. Sylvia remembered she worked at a different hospital across town, but they looked rumpled as if she'd slept in them. Her hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. "Chelsea?" Sylvia called, approaching cautiously. "Are you okay?" Chelsea didn't respond. She remained motionless, her gaze fixed on a spot on the wall. Something about her stillness sent a chill down Sylvia's spine. "Chelsea?" Sylvia tried again, reaching out to touch her shoulder. At the contact, Chelsea's head snapped toward her, but her eyes remained unfocused, gazing through Sylvia rather than at her. Her pupils were dilated, her face unnaturally pale. "It comes at night," Chelsea whispered, her voice raspy and strange. "The shadow of death. It wears white but leaves darkness. It marks them first. The 13th floor. It's waiting there." Sylvia's blood ran cold. "Chelsea, what are you talking about? There is no 13th floor." "I saw it last night," Chelsea continued, her words slurring slightly. "In the elevator, the button appeared. White dust, so cold." She shuddered violently. "It knows who's next." Sylvia gripped Chelsea's shoulders, giving her a gentle shake. "Chelsea, snap out of it!" Chelsea blinked rapidly, her eyes gradually refocusing. Color returned to her face as confusion spread across her features. She looked around, disoriented, before finally recognizing Sylvia. "Sylvia, what? Why am I in the hallway?" Chelsea touched her forehead, wincing. "God, I have such a headache. Was I sleepwalking?" "I'm not sure," Sylvia said uncertainly, watching her friend's face carefully. "You were just standing here, talking about strange things." "What things?" Chelsea frowned, rubbing her temples. Sylvia hesitated. "About a shadow of death and the 13th floor?" Chelsea's eyes widened. "I don't remember any of that." She glanced at her watch and gasped. "Oh, God, I'm late. I need to get to work." She hurried toward the elevator, then paused, looking back at Sylvia with an embarrassed smile. "Sorry about that. Must have been sleepwalking or something. Too many night shifts, you know." Before Sylvia could respond, Chelsea disappeared around the corner toward the elevator. Sylvia stood frozen in the hallway, her mind racing. The coincidence was too much. Mrs. Donovan, her own experience, and now Chelsea, speaking of the same horrors. At work, Sylvia couldn't focus. Twice, she nearly administered the wrong medication to patients, catching herself just in time. Her colleagues asked if she was feeling ill, noting her pallor and distraction. She blamed it on lack of sleep, which wasn't entirely untrue. During her lunch break, Sylvia sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a salad she had no appetite for. She pulled out her phone and searched for information about her building's history. Central Heights had been built in the 1970s, renovated in the early 2000s. Nothing unusual, just a standard high-rise apartment building. She scrolled further, finding nothing noteworthy, until she stumbled across an old newspaper article about an architectural controversy during the building's construction. The original plans had included a 13th floor, but due to superstition, the developers had labeled it as the 14th, skipping 13 altogether. What caught Sylvia's attention was a small paragraph mentioning that the chief architect had gone missing or died mysteriously before construction was completed. His body was never found either way. Sylvia's hands trembled as she set down her phone. It couldn't be a coincidence. The rest of her shift dragged on endlessly. By the time she clocked out, darkness had fallen, and a fine mist hung in the air, diffusing the streetlights into hazy orbs. Sylvia considered taking a different route home, maybe even staying at a hotel for the night. But the thought seemed ridiculous in the rational light of the hospital lobby. She was a healthcare professional, not some superstitious child afraid of ghost stories. She pulled her coat tighter around her body and stepped out into the night. The walk home felt longer than usual, each shadow causing her heart to skip. When she finally reached her building, Ray was gone for the day, replaced by a night doorman whose name she could not remember and who barely looked up from his phone as she entered. Sylvia hesitated at the elevator, then made her decision. She headed for the stairs, unwilling to risk another encounter. She reached the door to the stairwell, and to her shock, the door was locked. She turned around and tried to flag down the night doorman, but he was gone all of a sudden. She looked around to try and see what she could do or where to go, and suddenly, the elevator opened. Sylvia stared at the vacant elevator, its fluorescent light flickering ever so slightly. The interior was pristine. No white powder, no mysterious buttons, no towering figure. Just an ordinary elevator waiting patiently for a passenger. Her rational mind urged her to take it. The stairwell was locked and she needed to get to her apartment. What other choice did she have? Yet her feet remained rooted to the lobby floor, her body refusing to obey the simple command to step forward. A soft chime sounded as the doors began to close. Acting on instinct, Sylvia lunged forward, thrusting her arm between the closing doors. They retracted immediately, and she stepped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her finger hovered over the button panel. 16. Just press 16 and go home. But her eyes were drawn to the space between 12 and 14, the unmarked space where 13 should be. The doors closed behind her with a soft thud that sounded like a prison gate in her heightened state. She pressed 16 quickly, then backed into the corner, watching the numbers illuminate as the elevator began its ascent. Everything seemed all right, and as she ascended, she tried to ignore the lingering feeling of dread. She watched as the number slowly increased. Suddenly, to her horror, the elevator stopped. It had stopped on 12, but the door wouldn't open. Then, the number distorted and went blank, and she felt the elevator creeping up several more feet and stopping on something that was higher than the 12th floor. The door opened, and the figure was there. The hooded figure towered in the doorway, impossibly tall, its white coat hanging from skeletal shoulders. Sylvia pressed herself against the back wall of the elevator, her scream caught in her throat. White dust swirled around the figure's feet, drifting into the elevator like fog. "Please," she managed to whisper, though she wasn't sure what she was begging for. The hooded figure bent down and stepped onto the elevator. A noxious cloud of chalky dust spread around it as it stepped, and Sylvia covered her mouth in horror. The figure extended one impossibly long arm, its sleeve falling back to reveal a hand that was nothing but bone, gleaming white in the dim light. It reached out with a slow, deliberate motion. Sylvia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she said, her voice stronger now. "I won't go with you." The figure tilted its hooded head as if puzzled by her resistance. It took a step forward. White dust continued billowing with each movement, filling the small space with a fine mist that made Sylvia cough. The cold that emanated from the figure was beyond physical. It was a cold that reached into her soul, freezing her very thoughts. Its hand reached for the panel, paused, then withdrew as it took a step back into the opposite corner of the elevator. It stood still and waited for the doors to close. Sylvia was puzzled by why it had ignored her, appearing satisfied to ride the elevator up to the 16th floor rather than drag her into the sepulchral darkness of the 13th. The elevator rose without issue, the few floors passing by in the terrible silence, as Sylvia stood breathless and terrified with her monstrous companion on the elevator. When they arrived on the 16th floor, the entity extended an arm as if bidding Sylvia to disembark first. Oddly polite, though still horrible. She took a nervous step forward, scared to move, but even more scared of staying in there a moment longer with that skeletal nightmare. She crept by the looming figure, walking past, and then eventually broke into a mad sprint down the hall to her apartment. She spared one glance behind her, and the thing was gone. Whatever it was doing on this floor, she did not know, but she felt like she had to get inside and hide as quickly as she could. She made it to her door, heart racing, keys fumbling, and threw herself inside, closing and locking the door and going to her bedroom. The night seemed to stretch endlessly as Sylvia huddled beneath her blanket, feeling both foolish and fearful. Part of her knew that the skeletal figure she dreaded wouldn't materialize in her bedroom or elsewhere in her apartment. Yet another part couldn't shake the unsettling anticipation that it might. As the hours dragged on with no sign of the apparition, she hesitated, torn between relief and lingering anxiety, before finally succumbing to a fitful, uneasy sleep. The sleep was short-lived, as Sylvia started awake to a horrible scream that pierced the quiet night. She bolted upright, heart pounding. The scream hadn't been a dream. It echoed through the hallway outside her apartment, followed by a heavy thud. She scrambled out of bed, fumbling for her phone while trying to decide whether to call 911 or hide in her bedroom. A strange compulsion pulled her toward the door instead. She pressed her eye to the peephole, her breath fogging the small glass circle. The hallway was dimly lit, most of the overhead lights flickering or completely dark. At first, she saw nothing. Then, movement caught her eye, a figure walking slowly toward the elevator. Chelsea. Her neighbor moved with an unnatural stiffness, her limbs jerking slightly with each step as if she were a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Her eyes were wide open but vacant, staring straight ahead. Behind her loomed the white-robed figure, impossibly tall, its skeletal frame nearly brushing the ceiling. One bone-white hand hovered inches from Chelsea's back, guiding her without touching. White dust billowed with each of its steps, leaving a trail of chalky footprints on the carpet. "Chelsea," Sylvia whispered, her fingers clutching the doorknob. She should open the door, should scream, should do something, but her body refused to move. Chelsea and the figure reached the elevator. The doors slid open without either of them pressing the button, revealing a darkness deeper than black. As they stepped inside, Chelsea's head turned slowly, mechanically, to face Sylvia's apartment. Even through the peephole, Sylvia could see that Chelsea's eyes were now completely white, dusted with the same chalky substance that trailed behind the hooded figure. Their gaze locked for one terrifying moment, before Chelsea's face went slack again, turning forward as she and the figure stepped onto the elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime that seemed obscenely ordinary amid the horror. Sylvia stumbled back from the door, her legs giving way beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Chelsea. The figure was taking Chelsea to the 13th floor, just as it had tried to take her. The memory of Mrs. Donovan's death flashed through her mind, found covered in white powder, dead without explanation. She had to do something. She had to help Chelsea. With trembling hands, Sylvia dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. Her phone showed full service, yet the call failed repeatedly. She threw the useless device onto her couch and scrambled to her feet, pulling on a sweatshirt over her pajamas and shoving her feet into sneakers. The rational part of her brain screamed that she should stay inside, lock the door, wait until morning. But Chelsea was her neighbor, her friend. And Sylvia was a nurse. She helped people. It was who she was. She grabbed a kitchen knife, knowing it would be useless against whatever that thing was. but it was better than nothing. Sylvia flung open her door and stepped into the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. The corridor was empty now, but the trail of white powder remained, a ghostly path leading to the elevator. She followed it, knife clutched in her sweating palm, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. The powder seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light, almost luminescent. When she reached the elevator, she saw that the doors were still closed, the indicator showing it had stopped between floors. Her finger hovered over the call button. Was she really doing this? Was she really going to follow that thing to wherever it had taken Chelsea? Before she could decide, the indicator light began to move again. The elevator was coming back up. Sylvia ducked behind a decorative plant in the corner, crouching low as the elevator chimed its arrival. The doors slid open, revealing an empty car. No Chelsea, no figure, just more of that white powder dusting the floor. She approached slowly, knife extended before her. The powder inside the elevator was thicker than in the hallway, swirling gently as if disturbed by an unfelt breeze. Something compelled her forward. Not curiosity, but a desperate need to find Chelsea, to save her from whatever fate had befallen Mrs. Donovan. Sylvia stepped inside, her shoes leaving prints in the dust. The doors closed behind her, and she realized she hadn't pressed any button. The panel remained dark. "No," Sylvia whispered. She had been too late. The only trace, of course, was the strange powder in the shape of a skeletal finger, pressed on the section between the 12 and 14 buttons. She stepped off the horrible elevator and walked numbly to her apartment, praying that this had all been a terrible dream. The next day, her greatest fears were confirmed. She walked downstairs, taking them as fast as she could. When she emerged in the lobby, she saw the police and paramedics outside the building, and her heart sank. Ray was back to his post, and when he saw Sylvia emerge into the lobby with a horrified visage, he told her what deep down she already knew. Ray's face was ashen as he spoke. "Found her in the hallway this morning," he said, his voice low. "Just like Mrs. Donovan. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause." He leaned closer, his eyes darting around the empty lobby. "And that same white powder all over her. Police are saying it might be some kind of toxic substance in the building. They're bringing in specialists today." Sylvia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She gripped the edge of Ray's desk, steadying herself. "Are you all right, Miss Brooks?" Ray asked, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "You look a bit pinched." "I'm fine," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Just shocked. I talked to her yesterday. She seemed fine." Ray nodded solemnly. "They're saying it might be some kind of gas leak. Management's called an emergency meeting tonight." He hesitated, then added, "Between you and me, I've been working in buildings for 30 years. Never seen anything like this. 2 people, the same week, same mysterious circumstances." "Has anyone else reported anything unusual?" Sylvia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the building, the elevator?" Ray's expression shifted subtly. "Funny you should ask. Mrs. Henderson from 1202 mentioned something about the elevator stopping on a floor that doesn't exist." His eyes narrowed. "I told her she must have pressed the wrong button or imagined it. 13th floor superstition gets to people." He shook his head. "Buildings old enough to have quirks." Sylvia nodded mechanically, her mind racing. Someone else had seen it. She wasn't losing her mind. "Ray," she said carefully, "have you ever noticed anything strange about the elevator? White powder, maybe? Or unusual people using it late at night?" Ray's weathered face grew still, his eyes sharpening as he studied her.
"Why do you ask?"
"Just curious," she said, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. Ray glanced around again, then motioned for her to lean close.
"There have been stories about this building for years," he whispered. "Back in the 70s, when they were constructing it, workers refused to continue after dark, said they saw things. Management called it superstition, fired anyone who complained."
He paused.
"The architect went missing, and the foreman died before it was finished, found in the elevator shaft between what would have been the 13th floor.
"Covered in white powder?" Sylvia finished. Ray's eyes widened, and he nodded his head. "Ray, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you think there's something unnatural happening here?" The old doorman was silent for a long moment. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly.
"Miss Brooks, I've worked here 16 years, seen residents come and go, watched this building age and change."
He lowered his voice further.
3 years ago, the night janitor quit without notice, left his keys, his uniform, everything, just disappeared. Before he left, he told me something I've never forgotten."
Ray swallowed hard.
"He said he'd seen death itself in the service elevator, wearing a heavy white coat."
A chill ran down Sylvia's spine. "And did you believe him?"
"I didn't," Ray admitted. "Thought he was hitting the bottle too hard. But then..."
He trailed off, glancing toward the bank of elevators.
"I've seen things too. Glimpses, shadows where there shouldn't be shadows, and that white powder appearing and disappearing."
"Why haven't you left?" Sylvia asked.
Ray's expression hardened. "This is my home. Has been for nearly 2 decades. Whatever's happening, I'm not letting it chase me away."
He straightened up, resuming his professional demeanor.
"You should be careful, Miss Brooks. Maybe stay with family for a few days until they figure out what's happening."
Sylvia nodded, though she knew no investigation would uncover the truth. What was happening defied rational explanation. "Thank you, Ray," she said, turning toward the door. "I'll be careful." Sylvia considered taking the day off and just trying to ignore the insanity around her, but she felt that the distraction would be welcome, and it meant she would not have to be in the building for a while. It was busy at the hospital, and for a while she almost forgot the terrible night before. As her shift ended, the dread of returning home settled over her like a shroud. She lingered in the locker room, changing slowly, making small talk with colleagues who were just starting their shifts, anything to delay the inevitable. Outside, twilight had fallen. The streets were quieter than usual, or perhaps it just seemed that way to Sylvia as she walked home, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. Each step counted down the moments until she was back. Central Heights loomed ahead, its windows illuminated against the darkening sky. From the outside, it looked so normal, so innocuous. Just another apartment building in a city full of them. How many residents had no idea what lurked between the floors? How many came and went, oblivious to the horror that stalked the hallways at night? As she approached the entrance, Sylvia noticed a small crowd gathered outside. Police tape cordoned off a section of the sidewalk, and officers were speaking with residents. An ambulance idled nearby, its lights off but doors open. "What's happening?" she asked a woman hovering at the edge of the crowd. The woman turned, her face pale in the artificial light. "Another one," she said. "Mrs. Henderson from 1214. Found her in the stairwell an hour ago." Sylvia's blood ran cold. Mrs. Henderson, the woman Ray had mentioned, the one who'd seen the 13th floor, the woman Ray had mentioned just that morning. Sylvia's legs threatened to give way beneath her. "White powder?" she asked, already knowing the answer. The woman nodded. "That's what they're saying, just like the others. 3 deaths in 1 week. People are talking about moving out." Sylvia pushed through the crowd toward the entrance. Ray wasn't at his post, probably being questioned by police. The other night doorman sat there instead, looking shaken.
"Excuse me," he called as she passed. "They're advising residents to stay elsewhere tonight if possible. Building management's putting people up at the Coventry Hotel until they determine if there's an environmental hazard."
"Thanks," she mumbled in a terrified daze. She was not going to argue in this case. She left for the Coventry Hotel, and for a night she thought she might feel safe away from the building and its lingering specter of death. Sylvia had checked into her room at the provided hotel, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. The terrifying enigma of her apartment building loomed in her thoughts, compelling her to consider leaving. Whatever was happening at her apartment, be it a hallucinogenic or deadly powder, or the grim specter of death itself, it didn't matter to Sylvia. She had to get out of there. She desperately wanted to escape, to seize the chance to flee. But another part of her hesitated, uncertain about abandoning the known for the unknown. She didn't have much money, and while she could potentially find a smaller place and hire movers to leave that cursed building behind, the decision felt more daunting than ever. She considered the relative peace she had in that moment and made up her mind. She would leave and find someplace else to live. It was short notice, but she grimly speculated that it could be a life or death situation, and she shuddered when she considered the people she knew who were already taken. Her mind made up and feeling better at the resolution, she fell into a comfortable sleep. Yet, in what felt like the next moment, her eyes opened in a flash, and to her horror, she was alone in the elevator. The white dust was everywhere, on the floor, swirling in the air, coating her skin. The numbers on the panel flickered, and then there was only one glowing button. 13. She hadn't pressed it, but the elevator moved anyway, descending to a floor that shouldn't exist. When the doors opened, she saw not a hallway, but a vast, cavernous space. White dust drifted like snow through stagnant air. In the center stood the hooded figure, taller than before, its skeletal hands extended towards her. At its feet lay 3 bodies, Mrs. Donovan, Chelsea, and Mrs. Henderson, their skin bleached white, eyes open, but unseeing. Behind the figure, more shapes emerged from the swirling dust, dozens of them, hundreds, all victims of the thing that lived between floors, and it was waiting for Sylvia to join them. Despite her horror, a strange compulsion tugged at her, defying all logic. With a twitch of her feet, before she could resist, Sylvia found herself stepping toward the morbid sight. The doors closed behind her with a metallic groan, and in the distance, she heard the faint hum of the retreating elevator, leaving her alone with the enigmatic figure. It moved ahead, its long coat dragging along the floor and leaving a trail of white, chalky dust. Sylvia followed in a daze-like trance as the oppressive silence tightened around them. As she walked, the hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, its walls lined with doors that bore no resemblance to those in her own building. They were older, heavier, each adorned with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Beneath her feet, a low, thrumming vibration, reminiscent of an ancient engine, grew louder with every step she took. Abruptly, the figure halted, its head tilting slightly as though straining to listen to something. Sylvia strained her own ears, trying to catch any sound, but found only near silence. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, she perceived a faint whisper, soft and indistinct, yet steadily growing louder. The sound sent shivers down her spine, a sound that seemed entirely out of place in that world. The figure turned to face her, and for the first time, Sylvia noticed a subtle movement beneath the hood. Shadows twisted and writhed within. Her breath caught as the figure raised a hand, its impossibly long, pale fingers pointing toward the door at the far end of the hall. As the whisper grew clearer, a jolt of terror struck her. She heard her name called repeatedly in a voice that was almost disturbingly familiar. The door at the end of the hall creaked open by itself, revealing a space bathed in an eerie, flickering light. Sylvia took a hesitant step back, but it was too late. The figure seized her arm with a cold, unyielding grip and pulled her forward. She stumbled toward the open door as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. And in that moment, Sylvia stepped through the threshold into a nightmare from which she might never wake. Yet, she did awake. She woke gasping, sweat-soaked sheets tangled around her legs. The hotel room was dark except for the red glow of the digital clock. 3:13 a.m. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs as she fumbled for the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room, revealing ordinary hotel furnishings. No dust, no figure, just a standard room with bland artwork and heavy curtains drawn against the night. Sylvia collapsed back against the pillows, trying to slow her breathing. Just a nightmare. But even as she thought it, her gaze fell on the carpet near the door. A fine, white powder dusted the threshold, as if someone, or something, had tried to enter. Sylvia sat frozen, staring at the white trace. It hadn't been there when she checked in, she was certain of it. She'd inspected the room thoroughly, paranoia making her check the closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Then, she felt a sinking sensation in her gut, and looked down at her own feet, and saw they were covered in that same chalk-like substance. Her mind raced for a rational explanation, but she had none. The figure had found her. Even here, miles from Central Heights, it had tracked her down. Or perhaps she had even gone to its horrible lair in her sleep. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, though she wasn't sure who to call. The police? What would she tell them? That death itself was after her, leaving supernatural powder in its wake? They'd think she was having a psychotic break. It couldn't be real. But the powder by the door and on her feet was real. The deaths were real. And whatever was hunting her wouldn't stop until it had her too. Sylvia hurriedly dressed, her hands shaking as she tossed her meager belongings into her bag. She knew she had to leave, had to put distance between herself and everything here. But as she abandoned her possessions and fled, doubt gnawed at her resolve. Maybe leaving the city and leaving everything behind would be enough. Yet, deep down, she questioned if it could truly ever be enough to outrun the shadow of death itself.
You've been listening to The 13th Floor by Red Bad Andy. Red Bad Andy has been writing short horror fiction for a while now, mostly posted to the No Sleep subreddit. You can find more of his work there under the username Bad Andy the Red. And that, dear listeners, concludes tonight's episode. I'd like to thank Red Bad Andy for the story, and as always, thanks to you all for listening. As a reminder, we're transitioning off of YouTube since the channel has been demonetized, so if that's your preferred platform, it's probably time to move to another one. We've started a Rumble channel for video content, and are also on most audio podcast services as well. In any case, I'll be back with more Horror Hill next week, so until then, stay spooky.
You've been listening to the Horror Hill Podcast, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Tonight's episode was hosted, narrated, scored, and finalized by yours truly, Eric Peabody. Additional music by Nikki McSorley. Got a terrifying tale of your own that you'd like performed? Email it to us at submissions@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your work considered for future production. Note that any writing utilizing artificial intelligence is ineligible. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, why not help us spread our dark presence online? You can follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on social media, and upvote, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you're listening to this on YouTube. It helps us out a lot and also keeps you up to date on new episodes. If you'd like access to uninterrupted horror, free of ads and these annoying bookend segments, might I recommend signing up to be a patron? You'll get access to hundreds of episodes of this show, as well as everything from the other programs in the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights cabal. That means all of Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Drew Blood's Dark Tales, and more. It's a veritable smorgasbord of horrific delights. Head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to get started. If you're looking for someone to narrate or handle audio production for your own personal project, I just so happen to know a guy. Email me at ericpeabodyvoice@gmail.com. That's ErikPeabodyvoice@gmail.com, and we can talk details. If darkness is what you're after, listener, your search is over. Yet, let it be known, you haven't found the darkness. The darkness has found you.